What is mankind's greatest fear? What makes it so we fear the bumps in the night, the eyes peering from the darkness, the depths of the ocean or the vacuum of space? All of these things have one thing in common that chill us. They can all lead to our deaths. Every fear stems from the one universal terror of dying. We don't know what happens when we die. We view death as the ultimate mystery, as it is something no one can control, but that comes to us all one day. There are those among the living who claim that they have the capability to speak to the dead. On a late March day in 1848, in a farmhouse in Hydesville, New York, two young girls would go through an encounter, creating what would become one of the greatest religious movements of the 19th century. Meet the Fox sisters. Hello everyone, and welcome to Wicked Encounters, where we explore just what goes bump in the night. I'm your host, Allie, and today we're going to take a trip into spiritualism and how three sisters helped get it going. This is the tale of the Fox sisters and modern spiritualism. Spiritualism is a metaphysical belief that spirits of the dead can and want to be communicated with by the living, and that through the assistance of a medium, the living are able to contact spirits directly. Its origins as a religion can be found appearing in upstate New York in the 1840s, along with Millerism and Mormonism, as this region of New York fostered an environment where people believed that God, angels, and the dead could be directly communicated with rather than needing a holy man. These direct communications were done through seances in small groups and served as Sunday services for larger groups when spiritualist churches became more common. Spiritualists are the people who say they use clairvoyance, telepathy, mirrors, and other kind of items to communicate with spirits. For these spirits, there's little difference between when they were alive and now that they are dead. For the most part, death is viewed as not that big a deal, as souls survive bodily death and go off to live in the spirit world. There's no good or bad invisible scale of morality to follow either, as every human soul survives death and enters the spirit world, and can communicate with the material world if desired. Though that isn't to say that being a good or bad person won't affect you at all in the spirit world. You just won't burn in hell for all eternity for not putting your shopping cart back where it belongs. But I will judge you harshly for that cardinal sin being broken, you fucking piece of shit. Basically, if you've ever seen a ghost show, you hear them bring on a medium or someone who goes on about how the ghost is currently feeling, saying they see a woman or a man and they're sad or angry or whatever, and that's the spiritualist. Dead Files with their lady hosts, since the old one left, is a primary example of a spiritualist in action. On that note, Zach Baggin is not a spiritualist. He is simply an Ed Warren to Electric Boogaloo yelling bro. Lorraine Warren, though, yeah, she was the spiritualist. Spiritualists will sometimes refer to spiritualism as a religion, philosophy, and a science, claiming that spiritualism is based on natural scientific laws and does not involve the supernatural.
What? What the fuck?
Where other religions are based on belief, spiritualism is based on evidence that there is a life after death. To continue on that notion, though, there's a great deal of criticism and skepticism towards spiritualism, and that is a very lot of isms in that sentence. Mainly, most people believe that it's a huge scam, and many supposed mediums have been caught performing a scam through their mediumship. This includes those who have had a massive role in its creation as we know it today. In fact, you might even be able to say that it was completely formed on a lie. In 1847, the Fox family, consisting of John and Margaret, as well as their two youngest daughters, 14-year-old Margaretta and 11-year-old Catherine, had moved to a quaint farmhouse in Hydesville, New York, to be closer to the girls' older brother, David. Their home was a small, one-bedroom cottage, and the family made the best of it with little issues. That is, until March 1848. That month was a very troubling time for the Foxes. All month long, the family had been plagued by thuds, cracks, and snappings that were loud enough to wake them in the middle of the night and continue on, allowing no one in the family to sleep. Finally, John and Margaret were at their wits' end, and on March 31st, they sent the girls to bed early so they could enjoy some peace and quiet, before the inevitable noises would start up again. Though no sooner had the girls slipped into bed, the noises started up. Loud knocks came from the floorboards, the ceiling, bedsteads, door frames, anywhere the girls went, louder and louder than before, as if they were being pursued by an invisible force. And they proclaimed as much. Their mother, in an attempt at challenging the entity, asked it how many children she had, when suddenly 4 distinct rappings echoed through the house. Mrs. Fox was convinced that something demonic was definitely trying to harm them and sent her husband to gather their neighbors. Soon enough, the Fox's bedroom was full of people standing in the small home, set aglow from candlelight as they heard the cracking sounds echoing around them. A mixture of horror and amazement had gripped their neighbors until one was finally able to speak, asking questions aloud to what was going on, who was there, among other questions that suddenly were having knocks respond to them. Through a series of questions, the group had learned that this racket had some intelligence to it, and that it was a disembodied spirit that was once human. 31 years old, they were a peddler that was murdered for $500 and was then buried beneath the Fox's home by a previous occupant. The girl's adult brother David had posed the idea of going through the alphabet and waiting for the knocking raps to piece together a name. The rest of the adults, though, seemed to ignore this suggestion, though it's interesting that David Fox was already thinking about treating the noise like one would a Ouija board. Over the next few weeks, the entire event was given a life of its own, with more wondering who this unknown murdered peddler could have been. Some began to say that they had recalled at one point seeing a peddler passing through some years ago, though they couldn't quite remember when, and others would swear after a few years since that frightening night had passed, that they had recalled seeing David one summer, digging beneath the house until he had discovered bones and a set of human teeth. Before some of the more out-there rumors made their way through the country, the tale of a haunting in Hydesville had made its way across the state and into the ear of Leah Fish, the Fox's oldest daughter. She was a music teacher in Rochester who had heard the story from an excited student reading the paper about the case aloud. And well, the idea of her family being haunted wasn't exactly appealing to Leah, so she made her way to her family's home, only to discover that they had all relocated to David's house in a neighboring village to escape their neighbors, all of whom were hoping to meet the 2 little girls who had made contact with the dead. Perhaps being from simple lives, or perhaps Leah was simply a shrewd woman compared to her mother, Maggie and Kate's older sister quickly came to the conclusion that the girls were playing a fast one and demanded that they fess up to her what they were doing. Sure enough, the 2 girls admitted that they had been bored and wanted to pull a prank on their parents. They had perfected the art of cracking their toes with no perceptible movement and on demand. And honestly, that's a pretty neat trick. The only thing I can do is crack my jaw, and that's because of my recently developed TMJ, and that hurts. So very much. When the girls would crack their toe against a wooden surface, it would amplify the noise, and the rapping would sound as if it came from the beyond. Rather than be furious at her younger sisters for tricking everyone, Leah was inspired. She believed that she had in her possession a golden goose for the family, in the girls' toes. And well, she wasn't exactly wrong. Leah convinced her parents to allow her to have Maggie and Kate move into a house in Rochester with her. In the house, for $1 each, visitors could attend a seance with them. It was an instant success, and their fame as spirit mediums soon spread. At the time, Rochester was a hotbed for reform and religious activity, with the same general vicinity giving birth to Mormonism and Millerism, which my family comes from. Seventh-day Adventism. Don't ask me too much about it. I only remember we worship on Saturdays and are vegetarian. I actually once had a Catholic priest ask me about the religion, and not in a condescending or weird way. He was just genuinely curious, and I'm the worst person ever to come to when it comes to religion. Everything kind of blends together for me when it comes to Christianity, but basically the area was definitely one of the more open ones when it came to religious thought, and wasn't afraid of hellfire when it came to new ideas. During their time at Rochester, the girls caught the attention of community leaders Isaac and Amy Post, who were intrigued by the girls and the story of the murdered peddler. They invited the girls to their home to see if they could communicate outside of their usual stomping grounds, and were initially pretty skeptical. I suppose I went with as much unbelief as Thomas felt when he was introduced to Jesus after he had ascended, Isaac had later written, but he was swayed by a very distinct thump under the floor and several apparent answers. Even better, Leah had made herself out to be a medium as well when she began to communicate with the post's recently deceased daughter. From there, the girls were off to hit the big times, with the posts renting out a large hall in Rochester for 400 people to come witness the seance. Amy Post had accompanied the girls to a private area later on so that they could disrobe and be examined by a committee of skeptics who found no evidence of a hoax. And from there, the Fox sisters were being invited to New York City by Andrew Jackson Davis, who would become known as the John the Baptist of modern spiritualism. Andrew Davis combined two beliefs. The first was the idea and practice of Franz Anton Mesmer, who was an 18th century
German
healer who came to the United States and by the 1840s was a pretty well-known figure. He believed that everything in the universe, including the human body, was governed by a magnetic fluid that could cause illnesses if it was imbalanced. Mesmer would wave his hands all over a patient's body, giggity, and induce a mesmerized hypnotic state that would allow him to mess around in their fluids to fix them. It became a popular party trick, with some people getting good enough at mesmerizing people enough to make some money. Interestingly, some of the people who came out of their trance believed that they had visions of spirits from another dimension. The second belief that Andrew Davis took came from Emanuel Swedenborg, who was an 18th century Swedish philosopher and mystic, who was also a pretty popular figure in his time. He believed that the afterlife consisted of 3 heavens, 3 hells, and an interim destination that was the world of the spirits, where everyone went immediately after dying. Basically, it was limbo. Self-love would drive someone towards the hells, while love for others made one closer to the heavens. And that's why cornflakes were created to stop people from masturbating. Just kidding. Well, about it being from Emanuel Swedenborg's thing, cornflakes were made to stop people from masturbating. And that's why they taste like shit. Emanuel Swedenborg claimed that he was able to see the spirits and speak to them on all levels of the hells, heavens, and limbo. And to that I say, all right there, overachiever. From these two individuals, Andrew Davis predicted the rise of what would become spiritualism. He claimed that Swedenborg's spirit himself had spoken to him during a series of mesmeric trances, which he wrote down in a book titled The Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations, and A Voice to Mankind. Davis was so sure of his beliefs and made sure to record everything he could about them into his tome and diaries. In fact, a year after his TLDR title, he wrote about in his diary the following. About daylight this morning, a warm breathing passed over my face as I heard a voice, tender and strong, saying, "Brother, the good work has begun. Behold, a living demonstration is born." This was the same day that the Fox sisters first showed off their spirit channeling in their bedroom. David had gotten word of the sisters channeling in Rochester and invited them to his home in New York City to see their abilities for himself. Amazed by their seance and ability to speak to spirits, he joined his cause with the sisters' abilities to go from obscure prophet to recognized leader of the spiritualist movement that swelled in numbers. Under spiritualism, people weren't predestined to their fates and were able to take their own afterlife and salvation in their hands, as well as speak and communicate directly with those who have already died. It was comforting. More importantly, it gave people a sense of control. They had ways to steer their fate that they didn't have before. The Fox sisters went on to a professional tour to spread the word of spiritualism, and more specifically, their own abilities to contact the dead. The girls were becoming real sensations and celebrities of their time. Leah stayed in New York to entertain callers in a seance room, while Kate and Maggie went from city to city to work their magic. Both girls got married even! Yay! Maggie had a rather rough go of things, with many critics being particularly nasty to her, branding her as either a fraud or a heretic, to the point that one group in Troy, New York, decided that they were going to make her the victim of an attempted kidnapping. And yeah, fortunately she wasn't harmed, And she then went on to marry an explorer named Elijah Kent Kane, who viewed her as a fraud.
That's right. You're a big fat phony!
But could never figure out how she was able to so convincingly speak to the dead. He courted her and eventually persuaded her to give up the act and marry him, which she did, retiring from her act to attend school and enjoy her days until Kane died in 1857. In his honor, she converted to Catholicism, as he would often request of her. In her despair, she began drinking, heavily, but wholly and forever abandoned spiritualism as Kane had made her promise. Or so she would initially say. Meanwhile, Kate kinda doubled down. She married a devout spiritualist and continued to develop her medium abilities, translating spirit messages in new and astonishing ways. She grew her act to communicate two messages simultaneously, writing one out while speaking the other, transcribing messages in reverse script, and having words seemingly spontaneously appear on blank cards. Her career and those of other mediums really took off during and after the Civil War, where many people were in mourning and found comfort in the spiritualism movement, including the First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln, who would often hold seances in the White House in an attempt to communicate with her dead children. By the 1880s, there were an estimated 8 million spiritualists in the United States and Europe who all expected miracles to be performed by mediums like Kate, such as having a full-bodied apparition appear every single seance. It was exhausting, and before long, Kate too had begun hitting the bottle to deal with the constant stress of performing. Finally, one of the sisters had had enough. On October 21st, 1888, the New York World published their exclusive interview, one that they were sure would make waves all across the United States, if not beyond. They had in their hands an exclusive interview with Maggie Fox, in anticipation of her appearance at the New York Academy, where she would denounce spiritualism and reveal how she and her sisters had faked everything. Maggie began to tell the tale of how she and Kate had managed to trick the country into believing their childhood prank. She revealed how she and Kate began with an apple tied to string that would let them bump it on the floor or drag it about to make a strange noise. Then, she said how they had learned to crack their knuckles, joints, and toes to make a rapping sound that had become so well known to the populace. Then, how easy it was to convince people that everything was real, because they would do it for them, recalling once how a woman heard the rapping on the chair, and she claimed that she felt a spirit tap her on the shoulder from it. Finally, Maggie demonstrated her talent by removing her shoe, putting her foot on the wooden stool, and creating the short, little raps. Maggie had dealt a major blow to spiritualism. But why? It's believed that Maggie's main motivation was rage. After her husband's death, she began to hit the bottle pretty hard, and Leah and the other spiritualist leaders had gone about publicly chastising Maggie for her drinking and accusing her of being unable to care for her young children. While the oldest Fox sister condemned the actions, Kate had planned to be in the audience when Maggie gave her speech, a subtle but major show of support. Spiritualists believe things differently. Some believe that Maggie was an authentic medium who had spoken to spirits early on in her life, but had then resorted to horrible trickery when she stopped being able to hear them. Others believed that she had failed financially as a medium and decided she would profit by taking the side of a spiritualism critic. Whatever her reason, she rescinded her confession a year later, claiming she was told to do so by the spirits. This sudden change of heart didn't go over well with devoted spiritualists, who viewed her change of opinion to be a pathetic attempt at getting her cash cow going again. And they also probably weren't wrong. Maggie had only ever been a medium in her life. With no real other skills, Maggie had done little than deprive herself of her only source of income. Don't forget, her husband had died. While she attempted to rebrand herself under the name Mrs. Spencer, and she did get at least a few clients as a medium once more, she never did gain the influence and paying clientele that she had early on in her and her sister's careers. In 1890, Leah died, having never reconciled with Maggie. Kate died 2 years after, and 8 months after that, Maggie died as well. Despite Maggie's initial confession indeed dealing a blow to the spiritualist movement, spiritualism has continued to grow in popularity well into today, bustling and thriving with many people visiting mediums to speak to their relatives. Now, I have my own thoughts on mediums, but I'm more interested in knowing what you think about them. Despite Maggie admitting that her seances were all faked, she then did retract her statement. But what do you believe? Do you think there are those who can speak to the dead that walk among us? Have you ever visited a medium or taken part in a seance? Are you a medium yourself? Let me know in the comments. I read them all for future video ideas and to see how many other people enjoy learning about spooky stuff like myself. If you want to see what I release in the future, consider subscribing, liking this video, clicking the bell, and sharing it with others. Many of my videos are thanks to suggestions given to me, so feel free to let me know what you'd like to see covered next. If you'd like to support me in other ways, consider checking out my Patreon. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to give a big thank you to mine. I've recently given the page a rehaul and some updated tiers with benefits, like this one. Thank you to my VIP camper, Lex Prelius. I hope you enjoy the sneak peek at the summer seasonal illustration. Well, with that, I'm Allie, this is Wicked Encounters, and I'll see you next time. Bye!